Hi, I'm Maddy Hume and I'm from Scotland, Glasgow, and I'm interviewing Chris Bray, award-winning Australian photographer, and we're just going to be chatting through some different stuff about his photography career and how he can help you. So my first question was, what made you take the leap to pursue a career in photography over taking one in the field of your degree, which it was electrical engineering, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's tricky because I didn't really do any logical career move to end up where I am. It's really just a series of lucky opportunities that I've just run with. I had a good scholarship to do the university, and it paid for my university fees, but it also gave me enough money to do a little bit of travel on the side. And I spent that money on initially just some hikes into remote places and getting hiking gear and stuff. And then it led to a few bigger trips where I chartered a little plane to drop me and a friend in the middle of nowhere down in Tasmania. So that turned into quite the adventure. And Australian Geographic sponsored me for that trip, and they gave me enough money to buy a real camera. And they said, "Oh, go and try and get some photos. It sounds like a cool trip, and we'll publish a story when you get back." And that got me all enthused to go and learn a little bit about photography because I hadn't done any formal training. I didn't even study photography at high school. They were always too expensive, all the courses, and it was just like, it didn't matter too much. It was just like a hobby that I had a little bit, but never really took it very seriously. As a kid, I had a camera on the sailboat when I grew up, but I never really took it that seriously until Australian Geographic basically wrote to me and said, take some photos for us. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I better learn about how this all works. So then I did a little bit of reading up and learning how it all works, and came back from that trip with a lot of pretty useless photos, really. But the story was good enough that they still published a little story. And that got me all inspired to be like, wow, I could be a National Geographic photographer. So one sort of adventure led to the next, and I ended up being sponsored by Canon and getting a whole lot of really good camera gear. And through that, it was just opportunities. So by the time I had finished my engineering degree, I already had such good opportunities. I was already Canon's ambassador for Australia, and had already started doing, had a photography business starting. It was kind of right at that moment. I just graduated and was trying to work out, the electrical engineering path was pretty guaranteed and had good wages and good jobs, and the photography was going to be more fun and travel. And some people, like, my parents have always been super supportive whenever I tell them what I'm really looking to do. They're perfect parents, and that they'll be like, yes, no, we support you. But until that point, I remember my dad particularly sort of being like, oh, is this really the right move? You're gonna throw away all of this education and stuff just to go and travel the world and take photos. But I did. I took that gamble, and I've never looked back. I've just been really lucky.
Yeah, you've not needed to look back though, I suppose. You've done so well.
Just a lot of luck and a lot of in the best kind of places with good camera gear and enough time. Can't help but get some good photos in the end.
Yeah. How did Australian Geographic get in touch with you to take all these photos when you went on your hike? Can you remember?
I was trying to get sponsorship from some local businesses. The only proper job I've ever had was cleaning dishes in a local pizza kitchen. And I remember there, and I was like, I asked the boss there, like, would he sponsor me, $50 or something to help buy some gear? And he did. And then I think one of the people there said, oh, you should ask Australian Geographic for sponsorship. I was like, no way, that's ridiculous. But they're like, no, here's the form, you can just fill it in. And it was full of crazy questions like, how is this trip going to help Australia? And that kind of stuff. I was like, and they're like, no, fill it in, send it in, you never know. And so I sent it in. I guess I contacted them trying to fill in their sponsorship application, and they got back to me and were really enthusiastic. And that trip led to them naming my friend and I their Young Adventures of the Year for that year, and then led to media exposure and then more sponsors, and it kind of grew from there, really.
Right. So that kind of leads on to my next question, which was, how would you advise new photographers to get their work noticed?
Yeah, super tricky. I mean, you can't really follow the exact same path that I did because it was just such random things. But there are some lessons I think I've learned along the way, which is a little bit like don't waste too much time doing the same thing that everyone else does. Like, if you could just go and study photography and you'll spend however many 3 years and it'll cost a fortune, and you'll come out 3 years later with the same degree that all of your fellow students have, and still no actual experience, no networking, no contacts. You don't have even a half-started business or anything. You kind of get through this machine and you come out the same as everyone else. Whereas the best way to actually be doing something is to be doing it, and just start doing it exactly where you want to be. And if you obviously have to start small, but just try and picture yourself already where you want to be. Obviously, some careers need formal training. You can't just go and be a doctor and make it up as you go along.
No, that would be a bit worrying.
But photography, it's like such a creative thing anyway. And the fundamentals of it are pretty basic. Like in my one-day photography course, you can just sit there for a bunch of hours and learn really what's going on. And then after that, it's just practice. And in terms of getting better, getting your eye in and that kind of stuff. But then also in terms of opportunities to get people to see your work and stuff, it's just practice and networking and looking for opportunities and finding reasons to keep in touch with people. These days, of course, social media didn't exist when I was getting started, but for sure, things like, still Instagram and just hashtagging the crap out of everything and searching what hashtags are the most popular and just trying to get noticed. Competitions are a really good way to get noticed and it also makes you practice. If you hear of a particular competition, it's like, oh, man, I've got to go and try this particular technique because maybe the competition has to be, nighttime or flash. There's often a theme or a reason or something. So it makes you practice, but you also maybe win stuff and then suddenly you're an award-winning photographer. And it's good. I'd say the best thing is just get out there and already start practicing, do what you want to do, and maybe don't waste too much time on kind of getting sucked into the whole industry behind it.
You can get quite consumed by it, I would imagine. So the next question is, what motivated you to make your photography courses free? Because you could earn a lot of money from them.
Well, could I?
I would have thought so.
Thank you. So to begin with, I did a few other adventures and then a bigger Arctic adventure. And I was kind of at that point then where I was like, all right, what am I going to do? How am I going to make money out of photography? Because that was about the time when basically everyone had a DSLR and everyone was a pro photographer, and you could buy the best images of wildlife online for $1 from a stock library. And it was like, oh my goodness, there's no way I'm going to be able to just make money by selling beautiful wildlife photos, and not enough to make a career. Like only a couple of wildlife photographers in the world would be good enough to do that. You can't really start out at that level. So I was trying to think, okay, how am I going to make a career out of this? Because I think that's the other thing a lot of people need to think hard about is when they email me all the time saying, oh, I want to do what you do. I want to be a wildlife photographer. How do I do that? And you're like, well, first of all, it's not, most of my day-to-day life is not like what people think. There's not that much time behind the camera looking at lions or Arctic wolves or something. It's mostly business work in the background, and you've got to find a way. Most of the time I'm actually taking clients out there. I'm taking guests out there to help them take photos. I'd much rather be out there on my own. But it doesn't pay the bills. So you've got to try and morph your ideal dream job into some way that's still ideally pretty perfect for you, but does have the realities of some economics going on in there. My courses was at a time when I was like, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to make some money out of the photography? Realizing that everyone had cameras. I got a gig on a cruise ship down to Antarctica as their official photographer. And I just noticed that everyone there had the most amazing camera gear and just no idea how to use it. They were all taking terrible photos on auto mode. And I felt bad for them. And we had 5 days south, heading through the ocean before we got to the continent. And just because I was filling in time, really, I made a little, one day or like a 2-hour photography course for them. And everyone who wasn't seasick turned up to the little lecture room. And I just told them the basics of stuff in the simple way, because I've obviously never been taught formally. So I don't have all of that baggage of the technical stuff that maybe is just a bit too, it's not so practical. I don't want to know what do I have to do to get these results and explain it in the simplest way possible. And the guests loved it. And then they came, when I finished the lecture, they came up to me and said, oh, when are you doing your next lecture back in Australia when we get back? I'd like to do it again, or I've got lots of friends who'd love to do that. And I was just sort of quickly thinking on my feet and said, oh, I don't actually have the next dates lined up yet, but but if you put your email address on this list, and I'll let you know. And then I got this huge list of people who were super keen on my courses. So then as soon as I came back from Antarctica, I just sat down and created this full photography course, and then started, I emailed those lists of guests, and they came along and partnered up with Australian Geographic and Canon and Lopro and people I already had some networking through from the adventures. And it just sort of grew from there. It went crazy. So I was suddenly then doing Australia's biggest photography course. We were doing them all around the country most days. And it was a big earner for a while, but it was a little bit boring because I wanted to be out there photographing wildlife, not in a zoo teaching photography. That was like a stepping stone. So I pretty quickly transitioned the business across into actually running the photo tours, going into the wild, where all these guests were like, that's great, you've taught me so much about how to use the camera, but now I actually want to go and take some beautiful photos. Teach me out in the field. So transitioned across to that. And for a little while, I still had some staff who were running the same one-day course for me back in the zoos and so on around the country. But it was hard to keep staff doing that. And in the end, I was just split between too many different things. So in the end, I just swapped wholly to focus on doing the actual photo tours. And then you're right, initially I thought, well, I should just sell these courses. And so I filmed it all just in my parents' room, set up this pretend studio and filmed myself just doing the entire one-day course. And then I was like, oh, cool, edit it together. And then the idea was maybe give out a few of them for free and then swap over to selling them. So I put the first half out there, and a lot of people loved the first half. And then I just put the next one on for like $5 or something, and no one bought it. And I was like, oh man, there goes that idea. Because the power is obviously in having it free and reaching so many people. And there's all the benefits that come from that, like selling merchandise, selling photography course booklets and the summary cards. And then some of the people discover the brand and say, oh, I love how you teach. I want to come on your photo tour, which is obviously way more lucrative than just coming to a $5 or paying $5 for a course online. So it's more like a brand awareness decision in the end. So I put all of them up there for free. It was kind of a spur of the moment thing, really. I was just a bit exasperated that I didn't look like I could make any money off selling them at $5 each. And then lo and behold, it became the biggest thing. And I think it's now like the most watched photography course on YouTube. It's 100,000 of followers and millions and millions of views. And that has been invaluable in terms of just the reach, and it's also super rewarding. It's just so lovely because obviously I did put a lot of work into it, and people recognize that. They're like, wow, this is not just some clown who's sitting there and just talking rubbish. It's like beautiful examples for every little bit, and it's a course that people used to pay $500 for, and now it's all free, and people love that. I get so many beautiful messages from people. It's so like rewarding to see people that have just got so much more enjoyment out of their thing for free. And then a good percentage of them just choose to buy the course book or come on a tour or something. So I didn't really set out to put it out there for free. It was sort of something that came about because the charging didn't work. And it's now totally the best thing I could have ever done. And,
So what's like a typical day on your tours? What happens during them?
It depends on where we are. Obviously, different environments, different setups, whether we're on a boat or on a plane or on based on the land somewhere. Let's say somewhere classic like Africa, Kenya or somewhere. Then mostly, probably doesn't matter where we are. We're always up early because we're trying to get the good lighting. And being the photo to a leader, you've got to be up even earlier than they are and get everything ready and get everything sorted. And we're often staying in really lovely lodges and things, so it's quite special, pretty lovely. Yeah, not bad. But yeah, have breakfast, and then everyone's still super sleepy because normally it's still before sunrise, and we'll cruise out. And the earlier you are, obviously, the more likely you are to find something amazing and be there already in good lighting when the sun comes up to get a beautiful silhouette or something. So yeah, short answer is you start super early, and then it goes on and on and on. And if often, in the middle of the day, the sun gets too harsh and the shadows are too dark, and the wildlife often go and hide as well. In the heat of the day, they kind of go away in the shade. And so there's nothing much to do often in the middle of the day. So it's a good time to come back to the eco lodge or whatever and download your photos and have lunch and charge everything back up again and go through the photos with the guests and try and work out if they've got a problem, why are they blurry or why are they whatever. And then go back out there in the afternoon and do it all again. And yeah,
keep going.
It's a typical African kind of day, yeah. But
Yeah.
very,
So what's your sort of scariest encounter with wildlife that you've had, either on the tours or in your own personal time?
yeah, it depends on. A lot of people would see some of my photos or situations where I've been in. They'd be like, "Oh my goodness, that must have been terrifying."
Mm.
You know, the bear is walking right past. It's only like 2 meters away from you. That's so scary and so terrifying. But it's really not. And you'd only be there if you were familiar with how the animals are behaving, and you can read their behavior, and everything's very relaxed, and you do everything right. In fact, if a bear comes that close to you and is relaxed, it's because you're doing everything perfectly. If the guests are noisy and they stand up and stretch a little bit too often, or they're making too much noise or something, wildlife just keep a long way away. Like I'm a registered bear guide for Alaska, so I would take a group of people ashore, and you do everything right, and the bears just walk right past and keep doing their thing, and it's not scary. It's just it's incredibly impressive and humbling when something that big just flicks a glance at you and then keeps walking right past. But that's not scary. The scary situations are more like I like to get creative, different photos using whatever new technology is around. Be that put a camera in a deep sea housing and lower it down hundreds of meters into the ocean at night, and with a big bleeding tuna head attached to it to see what kind of. We had an enormous 6-gill shark, which is like a 5-meter deep ocean shark, come along, and you're just in a kayak. That's kind of scary. Or in Africa, I used to try and put cameras inside the carcass of something that a lion had killed or something else. So you'd find maybe half a buffalo sitting out on the Masai Mara somewhere, and you'd drive as close as you could with a vehicle, try and look around and check that all the lions had gone, and then sneak out and put a camera inside the carcass looking out. So it's like a cool photo framed by all the rib cage or something. And then you get back in the vehicle and drive away, and then come back in the afternoon and hope that the lions have come back and eating, and you get some really cool photos. But remember, you're never quite sure, particularly if there's a lot of undergrowth around. Is there a leopard just hiding in that next bush? One time, particularly with the lion, it was really short grass, and this was many years ago before there were so many regulations. But short grass and this lion kill, and we could see all the lions. They were like several hundred meters away. And I got out of the car and put this camera in there and adjusted it all and keep on looking at the lions, and pretty terrifying. And then got back in the car. And then as we started to drive away, a lion just stood up from the grass. That was like, the grass was only like this high. I don't know how it was hiding. There was nothing for it to hide behind, but there was a lion only like 30 meters from me or something. And I was just out of the vehicle. Like, in hindsight, it's like, whoa, that was lucky. That was scary.
Yeah. I would be scared doing something like that. I couldn't do that. So the next question is, do you think that your kind of photography career has inspired your love of conservation? Because I know you're really into conservation.
Yeah, I think photography. Definitely, because I think you end up traveling to all these beautiful places that are the most hopefully untouched, because that's where the wildlife still thrives. And especially having gone to those places again and again, you do start to notice degradation. There's whether that's global warming you'll see in the Arctic, like places that were just colder over 10 years. Yeah, there's less ice there now. Or there's different species that have come in there. Hummingbirds are appearing some bits in the Arctic where they just never used to be. And the busier some places get, there's more rubbish around. Or I guess when you start to scour the earth looking for the most remote, beautiful places, and then you find that there is human sort of damage there, even like a remote beach on a tiny island, like where I live now on Christmas Island. It's a super remote island, beautiful tropical paradise. There's like just huge amounts of plastic wash up on just one particular beach there that just happens to face in the right direction to catch all of the stuff coming in on the ocean currents. And it's come from Indonesia and everywhere else in the world, but it just kind of funnels in there. And you think, man, it's such a remote, beautiful place. There's turtles trying to nest in there, and there's plastic everywhere. And it's just like, yeah. So I think by going to what should be the most pristine places and having such intimate experiences with all the wildlife, but then seeing the impact that humans have on it, does lead me to want to try and find ways to either give back to conservation efforts or create my own, or at least pick up some plastic while I'm there.
Well, you've done really well. Like looking through your website, you can see how much you like care about all the animals, and obviously you're doing really well with it. So the next question was, do you feel a need to stick to geographical kind of photography, or have you ever kind of wanted to branch out into like portrait photography?
Not really. Yeah, I definitely don't think I've got a desire to do anything other than, and thankfully at the moment I don't have a need to. I mean, classic path through photography would be you'd start doing things like portraiture and corporate photographs and weddings. Oh my goodness. Thankfully, I've never had to shoot a single wedding. And I hope to keep it that way. But that was lucky. I mean, most people do have to do something like that, or they just, it's like where you practice and where there is money around, but it's kind of boring. And scary. I can't imagine anything more scary than having to photograph a wedding where you've got to get it right the first time and everything's under your control. Like you can't just blame the wildlife for the
See, from an outsider looking in, I would have thought that like taking photos of like all this wildlife would be so much more scary than taking a photo of a wedding.
Oh no, can you imagine the stress? Like you've only got one chance to get that moment right during the wedding. And and if you got your settings wrong, or if you're in the wrong position, or you didn't put the lighting in the right spot, it's all your fault. Very angry people. But with wildlife, it's like, what I love about it is there is so much luck involved. You can be as good as possible, and you'll still just miss most of the photos because the animal didn't look at you, or it's terrible lighting, or it doesn't matter. That's what keeps it fun. It's never perfect, which means you can always keep trying for more. And
so, see, when you're taking pictures, how long do you normally have to wait to get the perfect shot? Like, are you hiding out in bushes and things like that for hours on end?
Well, first of all, I'd say you never get the perfect shot. So that it's good. It's more a point, when do you get fed up enough, and when is close enough good enough that you're like, all right, yeah, it's not perfect, but it'll do, and then you move on because you've got other things to go and photograph. It's a balance between, if I'm there on my own, obviously I've got the luxury of being able to have more time, and I will be more patient. And I love that, being able to sort of watch an animal and learn how it moves around the environment and think about where would be a cool place to hide a camera or something, so that next time it walks along that way, it'd be really cool and you have that in the background and it'd be really awesome. But you don't really have that kind of luxury of time when you've got photo tour guests with you. You've got to kind of, there's only so long you can sit there. So then it's a balance between, have you waited long enough? Is it look like the lion's going to wake up again, or is it really just going to stay asleep? It's how much do you want that photo? How long are you willing to wait for it? But I can't really put it. It's not. I've never done that kind of stuff. Where you see at the end of David Attenborough documentaries, and there's like the making of, and you see someone hiding in a hide, and they're there for like 6 months every single day, waiting for the tiger to walk past. I've never done anything that extreme. No.
Oh, right. Okay. And what is your sort of favourite photograph that you've took, or one that's on your Instagram that you love the story behind?
It does change a lot. It's kind of, I normally like, you have a favourite and you use it to death, and then you think of it after a while, and then you have to find something new. Normally my favourite one is one that was good, but it's one that I've taken recently, and it's still exciting and fresh, and people are still commenting on it, and it's all fun. Using some new bit of technology, and then hopefully soon enough I take something new and get excited about that one. But there's some that have had definitely more success than other ones that more people know of. Or there was one I had a little GoPro camera on a remote control toy car that I bought in a supermarket in Nairobi, Kenya, and I drove it around. You can kind of catch animals' attention. Like if you drive it or do anything towards an animal, normally it'll just run away. So that doesn't work. But if you can just catch an animal's curiosity, particularly like a cat, like a lion or something, eventually they can't help themselves, and they'll come over and investigate it themselves. And that's way more beautiful footage because they're actually engaging with the camera and looking at it. There was this one time in northern sort of desert region of Kenya. I put this thing there, and there were some lions in the background with cubs, and I just put it in one little spot and reeled it. And this couple of little lion cubs came over in perfect lighting, and they came right up to it and were like pouring at it in like looking straight into the camera and putting their paw on top of it and snarling at it, making little roar noises. And the mums just in the background, just every now and again would have a little look and just be like, oh, what are these kids doing? And then we'd just ignore. But it was such, because often if you leave a remote camera somewhere, the animals will come up from the side or out of shot or from behind or something, and you're like, oh, can't even see it. But this was just one that was perfect lighting and perfectly in frame. And GoPro bought it for a TV ad and got used in a lot of places, and it was very successful and super cute. So it's still one of my favorite ones.
Perfect. So another question is, do you think traveling in your childhood, because I know you were saying you grew up on a sailboat, do you think that kind of inspired your love of photography, or do you think you'd still be doing it if you didn't travel when you were younger?
I think for sure it must have. It definitely set me up to feel like constantly traveling and visiting new cultures and places, that was the sort of the done thing. And it was also, while I grew up on that sailboat, we went to South Africa, and that was the first time I'd gone to any kind of wildlife game reserve or anything. And that was where I saw big charismatic animals, and that was super exciting for me. I memorized the entire book of all the different wildlife we could find, and so I certainly fell in love with wildlife from Africa as a young age from that trip. And maybe not if I didn't travel like that to begin with. Probably not.
You could be an electrical engineer.
You're probably right.
So my last question is, so obviously you're traveling around a lot, but in the UK there's obviously currently a lockdown, so we've been in a lockdown for about a year now. So what would be your advice for new photographers who are stuck in one place?
Yeah, you could do an awful lot with the time. For a start, you could make sure you've learnt all the basics. So even, for example, watch my free...
watching your videos.
Watch that a few times. But then practice. I mean, you can get so much more familiar with your camera just by sitting there, even inside your apartment. If you have a backyard, awesome, even better. But even just sitting there on the couch with your camera and going through all the settings and understanding how aperture and ISO and shutter speed all link and fiddle around until it's like second nature to you, that'll all really help when the borders open and you can suddenly actually travel. You'll be then super familiar with how your camera works, and you'll be able to get the exposure right and all that kind of stuff. But also just use that time to just try and plan how this is actually going to work for you as a business. Create a website, or start obviously an Instagram feed and so on. Work out what your niche is, or what your particular style is going to be, to try and create a bit of an image that you can concentrate on instead of just being too scattergun, because then it's hard to become known for anything. But you'd certainly use that time, because most of my time is not out there taking photos. So just because we're locked down now doesn't change a lot of that. But if you do have the joy of being able to go into your own backyard or something, maybe a good suggestion would be to buy a macro lens or something, where you can, because with a macro lens you can just find so many amazing photos in your own neighborhood. You don't have to, like, if you buy a giant super telephoto telescope lens, you've got to go to Africa or something to get some cool photos. But a macro, there's like every little bug on every flower and little tiny little things with the pretty patterns in leaves. And macro lens is always a good way to fill in time.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much for doing this. I mean, it's been so fun. So what I can do is, once I've written it up, I can send it across to you through your email, and you can have a look at it. Tell me if there's anything that you want me to change.
Strike out all of that. I really enjoyed that as well. Thank you so much.